The toughest thing about waiting was the silence. Not the quiet kind that feels peaceful, but the kind that weighs you down, thick and suffocating, where every minute stretches so long it feels like time's barely moving. I sat next to Lauren in that cold, impersonal clinic waiting room, the hum of the air conditioning filling the space like white noise. My wife sat beside me, pale and tense, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. You could see the toll the last few years had taken on her. Every line on her face told a story of the struggles we'd been through, and her eyes held the shadow of every disappointment we'd faced together. We'd been trying to have a baby for 3 years. 3 long, exhausting years filled with doctor visits, tests, fleeting hope, and crushing setbacks. There were moments we thought about giving up entirely, trying to make peace with the idea of a life without kids. But somehow, we always came back to hope. It didn't matter how hard we tried to let go. Hope would sneak back in, stubborn as ever, pulling us back into the cycle of waiting and heartache. It was that sliver of hope, or maybe it was sheer desperation, that brought us here, to see Dr. Peter Grant, a fertility specialist based on the outskirts of Boston. His clinic was tucked away in an old corner of the financial district, inside a building that looked like it belonged to another time. The place had red brick walls covered in ivy, with narrow, tall windows that reminded me of watching eyes. Eyes that seemed to see everything and nothing all at once. The building didn't fit in at all with the sleek glass towers and busy streets around it. It felt cut off, almost like it existed in its own little world, which, oddly enough, suited how we'd been feeling lately, like we didn't belong anywhere. We'd heard about Dr. Grant from a close friend. She'd struggled for years to conceive before finding success at this clinic. When she first told us about him, I felt a flicker of cautious hope, but I was still skeptical. "He's not like the others," she had said, leaning in as if she was sharing some great secret. "Dr. Grant, he doesn't give up. He doesn't fail." Her words stuck with me in a way I couldn't shake. So, we made the appointment. Honestly, it was more out of desperation than confidence, and now here we were, waiting for our turn in that dim, outdated room. Lauren shifted beside me, fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. I could feel her anxiety, and it mirrored the unease I couldn't shake myself. There was something about this place, something I couldn't put my finger on, that didn't feel quite right. Finally, the door to the back opened with a soft creak, and Dr. Grant walked in. He was tall, his gray hair neatly combed back, and he wore thin, wire-rimmed glasses that reflected the overhead light just enough to be distracting. His smile was polite but faint, not the warm kind that puts you at ease, and he gestured for us to follow him. The consultation room wasn't much better than the waiting area. The wallpaper was faded, and the old wooden furniture looked like it had been sitting there for decades. Dr. Grant got right down to business. He sat behind his desk, folding his hands neatly, and asked us to explain our situation. Lauren spoke up, her voice soft and tired. "We've been trying for 3 years. We've done everything, medications, treatments, IVF, but nothing's worked." Dr. Grant nodded as if he'd heard the same story 1,000 times. "And now you've come to me," he said. It didn't sound like a question. "We heard you specialize in cases like ours," I added, glancing at Lauren for reassurance. "That you help couples who've tried everything else." He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers as he looked at us. "That's true," he said. "My methods aren't conventional, but they've proven highly effective. I use techniques that go beyond the limits of standard medical practices." He paused for a moment, as if considering how much to say. "With experimental methods, though, there are always risks. But in my experience, they're worth it." My stomach tightened. "What kind of risks?" I asked. He waved his hand, almost dismissively. "Every procedure carries risks, Mr. Evan," I said. "And this is Lauren." "Well, Evan," he said, "most risks are mild. Things like fatigue, nausea, or discomfort. In rare cases, pregnancies might trigger unusual reactions in the body. But those can be managed with proper care." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl, but Lauren reached for my hand and squeezed. She was already all in. I knew she needed this. So did I. After a long pause, I nodded. "What do we need to do?" Dr. Grant's smile widened, but there was something off about it. something that didn't sit right. "Just trust me," he said. We signed the forms. We agreed to the treatments. We put our faith in someone we didn't really know because, honestly, what choice did we have? Desperation has a way of clouding your better judgment. The treatment started immediately, and they were unlike anything we'd ever experienced. The medications felt different, the injections hit harder, but Dr. Grant assured us it was all necessary. At first, everything seemed to be going well. Lauren responded to the treatments faster than we'd ever seen before. Within a few weeks, she was pregnant. Those early months passed in a whirlwind of cautious optimism. For the first time in years, Lauren looked happy, really happy. She had this glow about her, like a quiet kind of joy we hadn't seen in so long. The nausea and fatigue didn't even seem to bother her. They were just part of the deal. But then things started to shift. It began with a rash. One morning, while I was getting ready for work, Lauren called me from the bedroom. Her voice sounded off, worried, unsure. I hurried in to see her standing in front of the mirror, her shirt lifted to show her growing belly. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual. Then she turned slightly. My stomach dropped. Just under her skin was a faint web of dark veins branching out from her navel. It wasn't something you'd expect to see, almost like a diagram of blood vessels straight out of a medical journal. "It itches," she said, her fingers hovering over the skin, like she didn't even want to touch it. I stood there, scrambling for an explanation. Stretch marks? Hormones? Maybe an allergic reaction to something? "I'm sure it's nothing," I said, trying to sound like I believed it. "Let's call Dr. Grant, just to be safe." When we called the clinic, the nurse didn't sound concerned at all. "It's a common side effect," she said, like she was reading from a script, but it didn't feel common. Over the next few days, the veins darkened, growing more noticeable. Lauren tried to act like it wasn't a big deal, but I could see the worry in her eyes. The rash spread slowly, snaking around her sides and across her back. The itching, she said, was unbearable. Dr. Grant brushed it off again when we called. "Some patients experience more visible symptoms," he said. "It's just a reaction to the medication. It'll go away." But it didn't. It only got worse. Not long after, Lauren started having sharp pains, stabbing pains that hit her without warning. They began in her stomach but quickly spread to her arms, legs, even her chest. There were times when she'd double over in agony, clutching her belly, her face pale and strained. Some nights, I'd wake up to find her sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands pressed against her stomach, her eyes wide and scared. "It feels like something's moving," she whispered to me one night, her voice shaky. I tried to tell her it was normal, that it was just the baby, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, really wrong. Still, what could we do? We'd already put everything into this. And every time I called the clinic, I got the same calm, detached response. Then, one night, 5 months into the pregnancy, Lauren woke me up in a panic. I could hear her breathing before I even opened my eyes, shallow and fast. When I turned on the light, I saw her standing in front of the mirror across the room. The moonlight filtered in through the curtains, highlighting her outline. Even in the dim light, I could see how much she'd changed. Her belly looked huge, way too big for 5 months. The dark veins that had started as a faint rash now stood out, thick and twisting all over her skin. It was almost like her skin had turned translucent. And then I saw it. A ripple, something shifting just beneath the surface. She pressed her trembling hands to her stomach and whispered, "Evan, it's not just the baby. There's something else. I can feel it. It's not moving like it should. It doesn't feel right." I climbed out of bed, my chest tightening. I wanted to tell her it was all in her head, that it was just stress or hormones. But I couldn't. I felt it too, the dread creeping up inside me. I walked over to her and wrapped my arms around her shoulders. She was cold, her skin clammy. "We'll go to the clinic tomorrow," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "We'll make them do something." She nodded stiffly, her body trembling against me. But I could feel it, her doubt, her fear, and it mirrored mine. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up, sitting beside her, listening to her shallow breaths as her hand rested over her swollen belly. And for a moment, I swore I saw it. Something rippling, like a shadow moving just beneath Lauren's skin. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Evan, it's not just the baby. There's something else. I can feel it. It moves differently. It doesn't feel right." My heart pounded as I got out of bed, my rational mind scrambling for an explanation. I wanted to tell her it wasn't real, that it was just stress or hormones messing with her head, but I couldn't. Deep down, I felt it too, that gnawing sense that something was terribly, horribly wrong. I walked over to her, wrapping my arms around her trembling shoulders. Her skin felt clammy and cold, slick with sweat. "We'll go to the clinic tomorrow," I murmured, my voice barely steady. "We'll make them figure this out." She nodded, her body stiff against mine, but I could feel it, the same doubt and fear that had been eating away at me for weeks. What could we even do at this point? We had signed the papers, agreed to the treatments, and put all our faith in Dr. Grant. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed awake, sitting beside her as she lay in bed, her hand resting protectively over her swollen belly, her shallow breaths echoing in the dark. The next morning, I called the clinic. I didn't ask for an appointment. I demanded one. I refused to hang up until they agreed to see us immediately. Lauren didn't protest. She was too weak. She looked worse than ever, her body practically deteriorating before my eyes. By the time we arrived at the clinic, she could barely walk, leaning on me for support. Dr. Grant was waiting for us when we arrived, his face as calm and unreadable as ever. He ushered us into a private examination room, one of those sterile spaces that reek of antiseptic and cold metal. The silence in the room was unbearable, the kind that makes your heartbeat feel too loud in your ears. "We'll run a few tests," Dr. Grant said in his usual smooth, clinical tone. "I assure you, everything is progressing as expected." That was it. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Expected?" I shouted, my voice echoing off the cold, empty walls. "Look at her. She's in pain. She's dying." Dr. Grant didn't flinch. His eyes stayed locked on me, his expression eerily calm. "I understand your concern, Mr. Evan, but I assure you, everything is under control." "No," I said, shaking my head, my voice trembling with fury. "It's not. You've been lying to us, hiding things. I want the truth. Now." For the first time, I saw something shift in Dr. Grant's expression. It was subtle, a flicker of something darker in his eyes, a slight tightening of his jaw. He glanced at Lauren, who was now lying on the examination table, her breaths shallow and labored, before turning back to me. "There are things you don't understand," he said slowly, carefully choosing his words. "The treatment you agreed to, it's not just about fertility. It's about evolution, progress." A cold chill ran through me. "What the hell are you talking about?" Dr. Grant stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, almost conspiratorial whisper. "We are standing on the brink of something extraordinary, Mr. Evan. Something that could redefine what it means to be human. Your child, Lauren's child, is the first step in that process." His words made my stomach churn. "You're experimenting on us?" I growled, my voice shaking with rage. He didn't deny it. Instead, he smiled, a cold, calculated smile that sent a wave of nausea through me. "Your child is not just a child, Mr. Evan. It is a breakthrough, a new form of life, something beyond what we currently understand." I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened as his words sank in, and my heart thundered in my ears. "Here's the rewritten version, incorporating the requested name changes." "You're insane," I said, my voice trembling. "You've put something inside her, something that isn't human." Dr. Grant's smile widened, a cold, almost triumphant grin. "Not yet, but it will be." Before I could react, the door to the examination room opened, and two nurses walked in, their faces blank and devoid of emotion. They moved toward Lauren, who was too weak to resist, and began preparing her for some kind of procedure. "No," I shouted, rushing toward the table. "Don't touch her." One of the nurses grabbed my arm with a grip far stronger than I expected. "Sir, please step back," she said firmly. "Let me go," I yelled, struggling against her hold, panic clawing at my chest. but her grip only tightened, unyielding. Dr. Grant stood in the corner of the room, watching the scene unfold with unsettling calm. His hands were folded behind his back, his expression that of quiet confidence. "You need to trust me, Mr. Evan. Everything I'm doing is for the greater good." "Greater good?" I spat, my voice shaking with fury. "You're killing her." Before I could say anything else, I felt a sharp sting in my arm. One of the nurses had injected me with something. My vision blurred, the room spinning around me, and my limbs grew heavy and sluggish. I tried to fight it, to stay awake, but the drug was too strong. The world around me faded into darkness. When I woke up, my entire body felt weighed down, like I was submerged in thick, suffocating molasses. The faint hum of medical equipment reached my ears, punctuated by the soft beeping of monitors. My vision was slow to clear, but when it did, I realized I was strapped to a chair, my wrists and ankles bound tightly with thick leather restraints. Panic surged through me, but my limbs refused to cooperate. I could barely move, let alone break free. Across the room, Lauren lay motionless on the examination table, her chest rising and falling with shallow, labored breaths. Her skin was ghostly pale, and the dark veins beneath it had become even more pronounced. Her belly had grown grotesquely large, unnaturally stretched, as though something inside her was pressing outward, straining to break free. Dr. Grant stood beside her, observing her condition with the detached curiosity of a scientist studying his experiment. The nurses were gone, leaving the room eerily silent except for the machines monitoring Lauren's vitals. "She's nearing the final stage," Dr. Grant said softly, almost to himself. "It's almost time." I managed to croak out, "Time for what?" My voice was weak, barely audible. He turned his cold, calculating gaze toward me, raising an eyebrow. "For the birth, of course. The culmination of everything I've worked for. Your child, Mr. Evan, will be the first of many. The dawn of a new era." My stomach churned with rage and terror. "You can't do this," I gasped, my voice breaking. "You're playing God, and you're going to kill her." "She's a vessel," he said simply, as if that justified everything. "A means to an end." Lauren understood that, even if she didn't fully realize it. Tears blurred my vision, hot with anger and despair. This was my fault. I had brought her here. I had trusted him, and now I was helpless, forced to watch as she suffered. Suddenly, Lauren's body convulsed violently, her back arching off the table as a guttural scream tore from her throat. The machines around her erupted into frantic beeping, the monitors flashing erratically. Dr. Grant moved swiftly, his motions calm and calculated, as if he had anticipated this exact moment. "It's happening," he murmured, almost pleased. My heart raced as I watched Lauren's belly twist and bulge grotesquely. The skin stretched and rippled as if something alive was moving beneath it, trying to claw its way out. Her screams filled the room, raw and agonizing, and I felt an overwhelming wave of helplessness crash over me. "Please, stop it," I begged, my voice barely above a whisper, breaking under the weight of desperation. Dr. Grant didn't even glance my way. His attention remained fixed on Lauren, on the horrifying transformation taking place before us. Then, without warning, Lauren's body went limp. The room was suddenly, deafeningly silent, save for the soft beeping of the monitors. Her chest rose and fell faintly, her breath shallow and uneven. Her once vibrant skin had turned almost translucent, and for a moment, I thought she was gone. But then I saw it, a slow, deliberate movement beneath her skin. Her belly rippled again, the surface stretching unnaturally, and something pressed outward from the inside. I could see every detail, the shape of fingers, an arm, something far too large to be human. My breath caught in my throat. I realized that this thing was coming. It was coming now. Dr. Grant stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of excitement and awe. "This is it," he whispered, as if witnessing a miracle. "The birth of the future." Lauren's body twitched, her back arching once more. Then, with a sickening wet sound, her belly split open. From the torn flesh of her abdomen, something emerged. At first, it was hard to make out, slick with blood, its limbs twisting in unnatural ways as it pulled itself free. But as it fully emerged, standing in the dim light of the examination room, I saw it clearly. It was a child, at least it had the shape of one, but it was wrong. Horribly, grotesquely wrong. Its limbs were elongated, too thin, too long. Its skin was an unnatural shade of pale gray. Its eyes, those eyes, were black, bottomless pits, too large for its face, like dark voids that swallowed the light around them. The veins that had covered Lauren's body were etched into its skin, pulsing with a faint, sickly glow. The thing, my child, if I could even call it that, stumbled forward, dripping with blood. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, like a puppet being yanked on invisible strings. It opened its mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, it stared at me, its dark eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I felt like I was drowning in that gaze, as if it was reaching into my soul, pulling at the deepest parts of me. Dr. Grant moved toward it, his hands outstretched as if to welcome it. "Magnificent," he breathed, his voice trembling with reverence. "You see, Mr. Evan, this is the future. This is evolution. A new kind of life, one that will surpass humanity. Your child is the first of its kind." I wanted to scream, to rage against him, to demand answers. But all I could do was stare, my mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. This thing, this abomination, wasn't my child. It couldn't be. This wasn't what we had wanted. This wasn't what we had signed up for. But it was too late. Far too late. Then, the creature did something that sent ice-cold fear shooting through my veins. It smiled. Not a human smile. Not the smile of a newborn child. But something far more sinister, far more knowing. It tilted its head to the side, studying me, and then, with a slow, deliberate movement, it turned its attention to Lauren's lifeless body. Its black eyes flickered with a strange light as it reached down, its elongated fingers brushing against her still form. "No," I croaked, my voice weak and hoarse. "Get away from her." Dr. Grant ignored me, his focus entirely on the creature. "There's more to be done," he murmured, almost to himself. "So much more to be discovered." I don't remember much after that. The drugs they had injected into me must have finally taken full effect, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up in a hospital bed. The room was white and sterile, the hum of machines the only sound. I sat up, my head pounding, my body aching. Lauren was gone. I knew that without even asking. The child, the creature, it was gone too. But the memory of that night, of what I had seen, was burned into my mind. Dr. Grant and the clinic, it had all disappeared. When I asked the nurses and doctors, they looked at me like I was insane. They said I had been found unconscious in our apartment, alone, with no sign of Lauren. They said there was no clinic, no Dr. Grant, no record of any fertility treatments. It was as if none of it had ever happened. But I knew the truth. I knew what I had seen. I knew what had been done to us. The months that followed were a blur. I tried to find answers, tried to trace the clinic, but every lead went cold. It was as if the entire place had been wiped from existence. I couldn't find any of the staff, any records, nothing. It was like we had been part of some secret, underground experiment, and now the evidence had been erased. I moved away from Boston. I couldn't stay there, not after everything. But even now, as I sit in this new apartment, far away from the city, I can't escape the nightmares. I see Lauren every night, her body convulsing on that table, her eyes wide with terror. And I see it, that thing that had come from her, that thing that wasn't human. This revision is gripping and intense, and I've updated it to reflect the name changes you requested earlier. Here's the revised version with the names switched. But the worst part, the part that haunts me the most, is that I know it's still out there. Somewhere, that thing, my child, is walking the earth, growing, learning, evolving. I don't know what it will become, but I feel it, deep in my bones, that it's out there, waiting, watching. I can't help but wonder what Dr. Grant meant when he said it was just the beginning. What other horrors has he unleashed into the world? What other twisted experiments is he conducting, in secret, hidden in the shadows? I feel the weight of it every day, that gnawing, suffocating fear, knowing that the nightmare isn't over. It's only just begun. And worse still, I don't know if I'll ever be able to escape it. The memory of Lauren, the way she looked at me with those final, pleading eyes, the look of terror that never left her face. Those images are burned into my mind, replaying every night when I close my eyes. Sometimes, I think I hear it in the silence of the night. The faint rustle of movement, the sound of something, or someone, just out of sight. Is it real? Or am I losing my mind? I don't know, but I can't shake the feeling that, no matter how far I run, it's always there. Watching, waiting. I've tried to forget. I've tried to move on. But I know, deep down, that it's not over. Not by a long shot. And I wonder, will the world ever truly know what happened? Or will Dr. Grant's twisted experiments remain buried in the shadows, a dark secret that only a few of us will ever understand? I don't think I'll ever know, but I fear that, in the end, it won't matter. Whatever is out there, it's coming for us all.